over Christmas, and he asked the question, we have 4 kids homeschooled, should we be saving money to send them to college? You've described a situation. He seems to sense that this is maybe not a good place for his kids, but on the other hand, college served him well, his wife. So would you please respond?
So you have to gauge your own kids. I think it's a different, listen, I went to UCLA, I went to Harvard Law. There are no 2 more liberal institutions, leftists. I don't like the word liberal, they're not liberals, they're leftists. There are no 2 more leftist institutions on the planet than UCLA and Harvard Law School. I came out a stronger conservative because I used everything that I was learning as a starter. It wasn't the end point, right? It was, okay, you want me to read John Rawls? Okay, well now I'm going to go and I'm going to read Frederick Hayek, right? I'm going to read various perspectives on the same issue so that I know how to counter the argument. So I can argue leftist positions better than most leftists can, right? So if you have somebody who's a solid conservative, what I say to parents is about college, if your kid is not a solid conservative, if your kid doesn't have solid values by the time they're 18, they'll be a leftist by the time they're 21. That's the way that this works. All your heavy lifting is done before the college years. So you sort of have to, I mean, honestly, I think that if your kid isn't solidly ensconced in values before they hit puberty, you're in trouble. So this is a long as someone with a 2-year-old daughter and a son on the way. I mean, this is something I'm going to have to work on. It's something that, you know, I think that you have to gauge this. So what I say to college students who are really politically motivated is go to leftist campuses. Go to leftist campuses, learn how to hone your arguments, become a weapon. And what I also tell them is if you're going to be on a leftist campus, don't be stupid. If the professor is going to grade you down for being conservative in class, write like a communist. I mean, this is actually what I did when I was at UCLA. I'd argue with the professor in class, and then we had things called blue books, and blue books were great because they were anonymous. They just used your student ID number. And so if you read my actual essays from college, they read like something directly out of The Nation. And if you know, and obviously that's not what I think, but that's how you get to graduate summa cum laude at UCLA, go to Harvard Law School, and then use all their degrees against them. So
one of the things that you mentioned in your speech was that sooner or later they're going to have to come out of college and live with the reality of life and making a living and doing these types of things. There's enough kids in the millennial that have now come out of the colleges. How are they faring? What are they doing?
I mean, they're faring poorly. They're shocked. I mean, they're kids who are now suing their colleges. This is an actual lawsuit. Suing their colleges because they're saying, I was promised a job, I was promised an income after I come out of here. Right? The Occupy Wall Street movement was all disenchanted college kids who got out after that lesbian dance theory major and thought they were going to make 6 figures somewhere. And it turns out nobody pays to watch people theorize about lesbian dance. So, you know, so they end up, you know, going and living in tents in Central Park and pooping on themselves. So life is a rough teacher. What the left has tried to do is extend kind of the period of adolescence indefinitely, right? So now you're 26 and you're on your parents' health care. Okay, by age 26, I'd been married for a couple of years, and I was 2 years away from having a kid, and I already had 2 degrees and 4 published books. You know, it turns, and by the way, that's actually, I'm not even a success story if you go back 50 years, right? 50 years by the age of 26, you were supposed to be fully ensconced in your job. You're supposed to have like 3 kids by that point. What we've done is prolonged adolescence indefinitely. And so what Obama's goal is, what the left's goal is, what Bernie Sanders, Hillary, they have the same goal. And the same goal is to extend college out. Right? College is not a place that's kind of a break from reality. College is the new reality. So we have to make all of human life like college. And this is what they think Europe is, which is why Europe is going to collapse. And it's being invaded by foreign forces, and the barbarians are at the gates. And Europe is going to fall apart, and it is falling apart. So we can play this game, but it's not going to end well. And the problem is that because the education is so poor, instead of reacting against their teachers at college who told them everything was going to be hunky-dory, instead of having the kind of all quiet on the Western Front moment, you know, where the former student goes back to his classroom after World War I, he's in the middle of World War I, he goes back and he yells at his professor and he says, "You're telling all these kids the wrong thing. You're telling them that war is awesome." Instead of them going back and yelling at their professors, they say, "No, it just shows my professor was right because society is unjust." Right? The lack of my $100,000 salary, that's because society is mean, and so we have to transform the society. And that's why young people, again, 40% back speech codes in American life. This is why I think the last poll was nearing or over 40% of young people are okay with socialism, like the actual socialism, because they don't know anything. They've been taught stupidity, and how they feel is all that matters. I mean, there's a video that's going around the internet getting all sorts of play about income inequality. Income inequality is the stupidest issue. Income inequality means nothing, right? I mean, I have a lot of income inequality with Bill Gates, but I'm doing pretty well, and I don't care that Bill Gates is doing really well. The only thing we should all care about is that there are poor people. We should figure out how poor people can do better, not how to make Bill Gates less rich. But this video is going around and saying, here's a poll of what Americans think the wealth distribution should look like, and here is what the wealth distribution actually looks like. And I watched this video in bewilderment, and young people love it. And I watched this video in bewilderment saying, who told you that you get to tell the universe how wealth is distributed? Right? Who told you that you have a moral say as to how wealth is distributed? It's immoral, it's evil, it's wrong. You're going to have to steal people's labor from them. But people are not told this, and so they think that their own subjective vision of what reality should look like should govern what reality actually looks like, and it's only later, after 80 years of communist failure, that they realize, oh, that, and hundreds of millions of people dead, that they realize, oh, that was a bad idea. For like 10 years, and then they go right back to it.
Could you please explain the unholy alliance between the left and the forces and the Muslim supremacists, considering that the premises and the principles of both of them are mutually incompatible?
Okay, so they're not mutually incompatible to point A, they are to point B. What I mean is that it's a timeline. The left wants to tear down Western civilization because it thinks it's unequal. The radical Muslims want to tear down Western civilization because they think it's evil. So to the point of tearing down Western civilization, they're pretty much on the same page. It's where they go from there that's a problem, right? One side wants to build a caliphate and the other side wants to build a communist utopia. The reason that the left is routinely, and it's almost invariable, that the left ends up siding with the world's worst human beings in every situation is because, again, if you just go back to that fundamental leftist principle that equality of outcome is all that matters in life, that equality of outcome means that something just is happening, think about it. The real world is a place where God designed it this way. I believe this. God designed it not for every individual, but certainly for the vast bulk of humanity. If you do responsible, good things with your life, you will be more successful than if you do irresponsible, bad things with your life. Well, if the left believes that people who are unsuccessful are more virtuous, then what that means is that the non-virtuous are more virtuous, right? Because the people who are unsuccessful are generally not doing good, responsible things, and the left says, well, those people are victims, let's help them. Right? So the Muslims in the Middle East are victims of Israel. They must be victims of Israel because Israel's rich, and its neighbors are not. So they must be victims. Well, the real reason the Muslims, the Palestinian Muslims, for example, are poor is because they've spent all the money that has been given to them, hundreds of billions of dollars, all the money that's been given to them over the course of decades, and they've spent it on terrorism, and they've spent it on stocking it away in their bank accounts of Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas, and they've spent it on garbage, and they spent it on anti-Israel propaganda. That's the real reason they're poor. But the left looks at it and they say, they're poor. That means they're virtuous. This is why I hate it, really despise it. When Republicans do the whole, I'm a better person because I have a rags to riches story. You weren't a better person when you're poor. Okay, no one is a better person just because they're poor. By the way, no one's a better person because they're rich. All that wealth is a measure of how many voluntary exchanges you engaged in a free market. That's all that wealth is. But the idea for the left is that all inequality is evil. Therefore, the people who are unequal at the top are evil and the people at the bottom are virtuous. Which is why you'll hear people on the left say things like they like small business, but they hate people who are big business, like the Walmart family, right? The Walton family. They're terrible. Well, were they terrible when they were just a family living in the middle of nowhere? When exactly did they transition over into evil? Right? When they became successful enough, because their success meant, by necessity, according to the leftist worldview, they were depriving others of their fair share. And Bernie Sanders said this right after winning New Hampshire the other night. And this is Bernie Sanders' entire thing. He says the principle of America is the principle of fairness, which makes me want to vomit and never stop vomiting. The principle of America is not fairness of outcome. And he was talking about fairness of outcome. He said, oh, it's unfair that 1% of the population lives with more wealth than 90% of the rest of the population. And well, maybe, or maybe it's not unfair, because it turns out that 1% of the population is hiring the other 90% of the population to actually provide their services and labor.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, Mr. Shapiro. I'm a community college teacher, and so I I pay union dues to the CTA and the NEA, and as you can imagine, I'm not real happy about that.
Don't let them get a hold of this tape.
Now
I'm going to blur out his face. And
No, I'm worried. Do you have any hope? I believe the Supreme Court recently heard oral arguments, Friedrichs versus CTA.
Mm-hmm.
Any hope that that might come out?
Yeah, I mean, there is hope that that might come out the right way. It really depends on, whether Justice Kennedy had a solid bowel movement in the morning. I mean, basically, all Supreme Court arguments basically boil down to this vital question of whether he took his Metamucil. Justice Kennedy theoretically has an overriding philosophy of what he thinks of as individual liberty. So anything that allows you to do more stuff on your own is something we should allow. So he was in favor of gay marriage because it allows gay people to get married. He's in favor. He's against campaign finance reform because he thinks people should be allowed to spend money on politics. So presumably, theoretically, he could vote the right way on this case, saying teachers should be allowed not to have to give their money to a union that uses that money to push certain political causes, which is what the case is about. So it's possible that Justice Kennedy comes out the right way. I hate that we live in a system where we have to wait for the Qadi on the Hill to dictate to us what our lives are going to be like in perpetuity. It's disgusting to me. It's a perversion of the constitutional order. I wrote at Harvard Law School, I wrote my entire Harvard Law School third-year paper on the idea that Madison versus Marbury is wrongly decided. That Marbury versus Madison is wrongly decided. That basically the Supreme Court should not have the power of judicial review because the founders didn't believe any human beings should be invested with that much authority to destroy the Constitution if they saw fit. And in fact, Hamilton clearly writes, in his Federalist 78, he talks specifically about how if the court should start to exercise will over constitutionalism, over basic philosophy of government, then it's betrayed its entire purpose. So it's sad to me that conservatives have been relegated to waiting around. And by the way, this is why the saddest thing to me of all about this election is that if we lose this election, or if Donald Trump wins the election, if any of these things happen, if conservatives lose the election, there are at least 2 justices who are probably going to step down, maybe 3 or 4, in the next 4 to 8 years.